When the ships arrived, the shoreline did not erupt in celebration. It unfolded into lists. When the colony fell, the sea of faces became a census and a commodity. It was not chaos the victors described in taverns. It was law, written, stamped, and filed. The dark reality was not only punishment, it was property under new names. Officials framed this transfer as administration. What left towns were not only goods and livestock, but women whose presence was transformed into accounts and obligations. There was a term used in the colonial registers to give the act a shape and a law. In the ledgers, they were cataloged under categories that legitimized seizure and resale. Those words made violence legible. Those ledgers made the violence permanent. Today, we will open those archives, read the entries, and trace the mechanism that turned bodies into entries. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel to follow every document we disclose. What happens to a person when an empire decides their name belongs to a ledger? They organized squads at dawn. Captain Alonzo arrived with a paper list while drums thudded distant and dogs barked. The process began in stages that resembled routine more than frenzy. Soldiers cordoned neighborhoods. Clerks waited with ink on their fingers. Women were gathered, separated, examined, and moved along routes stamped into official orders. It was systematic, organized from the top. Governor Lobo issued a circular that read like fiscal policy. The capture was not an accident of war. It was a sanctioned transfer of human beings into spheres of tax and property. Scribe Lucia walked the line and scratched notes into a folio, while dust and salt stung the air. Officials like Magistrate Herrera oversaw the categorization. Their faces were not frenzied, they were indifferent and efficient. In the field, the inspection was clinical. Surgeon Mateo and Clerk Isabel stood by a table as soldiers brought forward captive women. The surgeon tapped wrists, smelled breath, counted teeth. The clerk checked hair, noted scars, and measured height with a tape that creaked under sun. A merchant named Rafi waited at the road with coins clinking in a box and a ledger bound in leather. A cart driver called Tomas loaded women into wagons. The sense of sweat and sea mixed with wood smoke and the metallic tang of ink. One woman, Rosa, pressed her palm to a wooden post and whispered a name into the wind that no longer mattered. Another, called Esperanza, gripped a child and stared at the horizon until a soldier shoved her forward. Conversation was sparse but sharp. The captain said to the clerk, "Have the records been prepared?" The clerk answered, "They are in order." The captain nodded. "Are the valuations agreed?" The clerk hesitated. "Then the magistrate will set the rates." Small exchanges like this turned human beings into prices. They marched along roads that ate sound. The wagons rattled, leather straps cracked, sandals scuffed dust into thin clouds that smelled of dry earth and old sweat. At night, they camped under a slate of stars. The women pressed together for warmth and for memory. They hummed fragments of songs into the dark while the rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog kept pace with their fear. In the morning, the clerk reopened the ledger and inked new lines. Merchant Rafi negotiated with a broker named Anapala, while priest Esteban observed, muttering blessings that blurred into bookkeeping. Each line in the ledger had a price and a destination. Some were destined for plantations, others for households, and a select few for the governor's quarters. The ledger recorded year, place of capture, physical description, and an assigned value. It read like a shipping manifest that had swallowed lives. Markets were formalized under regulation. They met at squares with canopies and wooden stalls where officials inspected, appraised, and stamped approval. A woman named Marta was prodded by an appraiser called Diego as children cried nearby and a crowd murmured. The smell at the market was a sharp mix of citrus and stale sweat, the metallic edge of coins exchanging hands, and the dry rasp of vellum pages. Traders hung printed proclamations that authorized sales and described acceptable transactions. The bureaucracy worked with ritual efficiency. Ledgers were kept in municipal offices under lock and key. Clerk Isabel would copy an entry while Governor Lobo's seal dried on a page. Entries read like evidence and like law. There were lines that noted conversion as a condition, entries that specified whether a woman might be apprenticed or assigned to domestic work, and clauses that made children born thereafter the property of the colonizers. The ledger was both instrument and proof. It was cited in petitions, in tax rolls, and in later appeals that rarely reversed what had been done. Inside the harem-like spaces that served as official holding houses, names were stripped quickly and replaced with numbers or titles. The rooms smelled of waxed floors and boiled herbs used to steady nerves. A woman called Juliana learned a new name given by the house manager, Mercedes. The air was full of the soft clatter of teacups, the whisper of cloth, and the sharp index of instruction. Staff included a midwife named Ana who measured and recorded, a eunuch named Ramon who controlled access, and a keeper called Pilar who disciplined those who resisted. Forced conversion ceremonies were scheduled as bureaucratic events, where a priest certified that rites were completed and a scribe entered the fact into the register. Punishments for refusal were public and procedural. They included confinement in cold rooms, the cutting of hair to erase identity, and certificates logged with dates and signatures. The space worked to desensitize, to teach obedience, and to erase previous loyalties. Women learned new prayers, new names, and new silences. Reproduction was regulated as a tool of social engineering. Laws defined the paternity of children born to those deemed property. A child's status, records recorded at birth in birth ledgers, often in the same volumes that listed sales. Midwife Ana recorded births in faint ink, while Governor Lobo's representative, Magistrate Herrera, confirmed paternity for tax purposes. Children were assigned to households or to institutions based on clauses that favored the colonizer's lineage. Mothers faced a cruel calculus. To bear children meant a change in status that could secure a nominal security for the child, but also meant acceptance of a system that erased their natal kinship ties. Some mothers attempted to hide names and keep scraps of original languages alive. Others taught lullabies that carried old place names. A line in a ledger could determine whether a child was apprenticed to a craft, apprenticed to a soldier, or simply registered as property and never recorded as a person. Humiliation became spectacle. Processions past city gates displayed bound women as warnings. Marks were cut into garments or sewn into collars to signify new status. Public punishments included shaming rituals performed at market squares where officials read entries aloud from ledgers to show the legal basis for removal. Merchant Rafi and appraiser Diego took positions to verify tags in front of crowds that smelled of smoke and roasting meat. Priests like Esteban pronounced moral justifications, while clerks like Lucia read the official entries. The aim was to instill fear and compliance. Women who resisted were singled out to be examples. One such woman, named Ana Maria, stood defiant and was forced to carry a registration scroll through the city while children taunted and masters looked on. Her voice broke the hush with a single question that no one could answer. The spectacle was both punishment and display of bureaucratic power. The demographic impact was measurable. Registers showed an abrupt change in population ratios across decades. Villages emptied, languages thinned, and family lines fractured. Scholars who later examined ledgers traced patterns of disappearance, of assimilation, and of cultural loss. Those who returned from servitude often found their communities altered, their places filled, their names misunderstood. Trauma passed down through generations as silence and the absence of storytellers. Children born under the system inherited not only new legal statuses, but also fragmented memories. Records that once served to legitimize holdings became, in later hands, evidence of disappearance and erasure. Historians today use those same ledgers to quantify loss and to piece together the human cost. At roughly this point in the narrative, we pause to acknowledge how difficult this material can be to hear. If you are unsettled by what you have heard, that reaction matters. Share your response in the comments and start your message with archive : so we can collect leads and testimonies. Tell us if you have seen a ledger or a document in family papers, or if a local memory survives about an official named Lobo or a clerk called Lucia. Your notes help direct future investigations and build a community that values memory. We read every contribution, and we will pursue records you point us to. Now we return to the documents and the people they touched. The archives keep naming the instruments of that institutional cruelty. Petitions filed by a few brave survivors requested release or redress. One plea, written by Rosa, asks simply to have her original name restored. The petition was stamped denied. In another case, a scribe recorded an appeal from a husband who sought the return of his wife. The entry closed with the phrase, "property confirmed." Those entries appear indelible, but also human. They record a handshake, a signature, a moment when law and violence overlapped. Names included in those pages include Merchant Rafi, Captain Alonzo, Magistrate Herrera, Clerk Isabel, Scribe Lucia, Priest Esteban, Midwife Ana, Keeper Pilar, and Governor Lobo. Each acted within the web of bureaucracy that made the system work. Their handwriting sits on the same paper as the fragments of songs some women managed to slip into margins. In the end, the ledger was not just a book. It was a machine that turned conquest into permanence. The documents that justified seizures also became the trail that reveals them. For every cross line that read conversion or sale, there is a human life erased, and sometimes a child left to choose between two worlds. The bureaucracy turned violence into routine and routine into law. The moral question remains unresolved but urgent. How do we remember those who appear only as ink and measure in dusty volumes? What responsibility do modern institutions have when the records of past crimes sit in public archives? And what of the women whose names were written over, then forgotten? If this investigation matters to you, subscribe to the channel to follow our next episode, where we publish transcripts and images from the ledgers cited here. Check the description for source links and archival references. We will continue to open boxes and read the marginalia that governmental hands try to render invisible. These documents tell a story of policy, of taxation, of punishment, and of a deliberate campaign to convert persons into property. They do not allow us to rebuild everything lost, but they give us an accountable map of what was sanctioned and how it was enforced. The last line we leave you with is one that echoes beyond the archive and into the present. What does justice look like for lives that were cataloged as entries and then erased from memory?